4 people were shot dead execution style in a store in Brooklyn, and after it first made the news, it was never mentioned again anywhere. No investigation updates, no suspects, no arrests, nothing. So I decided to do some of my own investigating, and I uncovered quite an astounding tale. Welcome to the Brazen Breeds Podcast. This quadruple homicide is officially unsolved, and I did my best to try and shed some light as to who may have been behind it and why. On September 21st, 1990, police were alerted to shots fired inside of a tire shop in the Bushwick neighborhood of Brooklyn, and they arrived to the scene of a massacre. The Madison Tire Corporation at 427 Central Avenue in Bushwick had been open for less than a month, and it stood right across the street from PS 377, an elementary school. And outside, it still had an orange banner announcing the store's grand opening. And the business was new, and the workers were unfamiliar to residents in the area. On the day of the murders, 4 people described as employees were on duty. There were 2 in the front and 2 in the back room. And at approximately 10:20 a.m., 2 gunmen armed with at least 2 9mm entered the store, and what happened next unfolded very quickly. A woman just happened to walk into the store at the time of the murders and noticed 2 dead bodies on the floor, and the gunmen were still inside the shop, and they fired shots at her which missed, and they took off running outside of a back door, and the woman ran outside and flagged down a nearby patrol car. Within minutes, the block is flooded with police and ambulances and onlookers, and officers entered the store and found 2 dead men lying on the floor in the front behind the cash register, and the other 2 were discovered in a back room. According to police, the gunmen had 2 people laid down on the floor behind the cash register, and the 2 others lie on the floor in the back room and began firing at them at point-blank range, and the entire episode only lasted a few minutes. There were no signs of struggle and no evidence that any of the victims resisted. However, one of the men who was shot in the back room had a gunshot wound to his hand, which suggested that he may have raised it in a defensive posture before he was shot. So now the scene is chaotic. There's cops, there's ambulances everywhere. There's over 200 onlookers trying to get a glimpse of this massacre. And there's kids climbing the fences across the street at PS 377 to try to get a view of the scene. The 2 men in the front of the store were pronounced dead at the scene, and the 2 men in the back room were clinging to life, and they were rushed to nearby hospitals, St. Mary's and Woodhull hospitals, and they later died from their injuries there. 32-year-old Alberto Rosario of Bayside, Queens was shot 3 times in the head, and he was pronounced dead inside the store. And his 17-year-old nephew Alvin Parache, also of Bayside, Queens, was shot twice in the head, and he was also pronounced dead. And they were both immigrants from the Dominican Republic. The 2 men in the back room were initially unidentified in reports, but were broadly described as Hispanic men between the ages of 17 and 37. Alvin Parache's mother and uncle arrived to the scene, as well as Alberto Rosario's sister, and they were frantic and in tears and trying to understand what happened, and they had no idea why they would have been targeted for violence. Relatives told reporters that Rosario and Parache had worked at another tire store in Brooklyn before helping to open the Madison tire shop just 2 weeks earlier. Police reported that it wasn't immediately known if anything was taken from the scene. Although the cash register was open, there was no clear indication of theft, and they recovered 9 9mm shell casings, 6 from the front of the store and 3 from the back. A small amount of drug paraphernalia, including strainers and pad stamps, was found in the store, which are commonly used for drug processing. But the police emphasized that there was no evidence linking the killings to drug activity. The woman who stumbled across the murders described the assailants as 2 Hispanic men in their 20s. One of them was around 5'4" tall with thick stubble, and the other one was around 5'11" and wearing a dark jacket. There were other witnesses as well, and one of them reported that after hearing gunshots inside the store, they saw 2 men flee out the back room and hop in a 4-wheel drive vehicle that may have been a Suzuki Jeep. But police stated that the witness accounts conflicted and the description of the suspects varied. Police officials were cautious in their initial statements. Deputy Chief Emil Ciccatelli The commander of the Brooklyn detectives said that the shooting had all the hallmarks of an execution, but he couldn't rule out a robbery. He was quoted as saying, if it was a stick-up, it was an aborted stick-up. If not, it was a hit. Well, you don't have to be Columbo to figure out that those were the two likely possibilities right off the bat. Police emphasized several unresolved questions. There was no clear indication of theft, no struggle. The victims were all shot at close range. There were conflicting witness descriptions. Drug paraphernalia was present, but there was no indication of drug trafficking. Another police spokesperson said that investigators were having difficulty determining what is imagination and what is fact, due to the speed of the attacks and the inconsistent witness accounts. Others noted that the store had been open such a short time that nobody in the area got to know the workers well enough to explain why they would have been targeted. By the end of the day, police confirmed the following: 4 people were killed, 2 gunmen were involved, the weapons were 9mm, and the victims were ordered to the floor. What investigators could not determine was why. Was it a robbery that went wrong? Was it an execution-style hit? Was the presence of drug paraphernalia incidental or relevant? Police publicly stated that they didn't know, and they didn't know the motive. Investigation into the murders pulled police in numerous directions, and days went by, then weeks, and it was looking like this case may go cold. And what's strange is that there's no news publications about the murders after the initial news broke on September 21st, 1990. After that day, there's no mention in any news sources about the murders, no investigation updates, no mentions of potential suspects, no arrests. 4 people get shot execution style in a tire store, and not a single whisper about it ever surfaces again. Through all the research I've done for my crime stories, I've been fortunate to connect with some OGs who were very well connected and respected in the streets, some former NYPD officers, and whenever I'm working on a story that I think they may have knowledge of, I'll reach out to them and ask them questions, and a lot of times they're able to give me some pertinent information or point me in the right direction. So I reached out to them. I said, hey, you ever hear about this quadruple homicide in Bushwick in 1990? You have any idea why it could have happened? Who may have been involved? Was anyone arrested? And lo and behold, I got back much more than expected and uncovered the tale of a deal for 2 kilos of heroin and $400,000. So I want to emphasize that I'm going a little bit off the radar here and sharing some inside information that is pretty much word of mouth, and I don't have any official documentation to corroborate this, but it's the best that I could offer here. So 2 months after the tire shop murders, a man named Hector Madera was gunned down in the streets of Brooklyn, and he was the cousin of a man named Miguel Pan. Madera and Pan were involved with a significant drug crew from Brooklyn named the Morales family. The Morales family was run by 4 Dominican brothers named Ramon, Julio, Leo, and Carlos Morales. And Leo was the boss. They lived in Bushwick near Knickerbocker Avenue and had been in operation since the 1970s, selling heroin and cocaine in bulk. They moved a vast amount of weight out of a home on Bushwick Avenue, which was known as the Greenhouse. They had numerous drug spots around Brooklyn, and one of their busier spots was on Cooper and Evergreen. The Morales family was closely associated with the Italians, and they had a strong working relationship with each other. And the Moraleses also structured their own family after the mafia, with a boss, underbosses, capos, and soldiers. Bushwick, particularly Knickerbocker Avenue, was a stronghold of the Bonanno family. And the Bonannos in the late 70s ran one of the biggest heroin trafficking organizations in the world. And they did it through what's known as the Pizza Connection, where they used pizza parlors as drug fronts. The Moraleses were very tight with the unofficial leader of the Bonannos at that time, the infamous Carmine the Cigar Galante, who was considered to be the biggest heroin kingpin in the world. In July of 1979, Galante was famously gunned down in the backyard of a restaurant in Bushwick, and he still had his cigar clenched in his teeth, a very famous picture that made its rounds around the world. And the Moraleses were among those who were in attendance of Galante's funeral. The Moraleses were connected with the Cali cartel in Colombia, whom they received bulk quantities of cocaine from, and they were major suppliers of heroin, cocaine, and crack to kingpins all over New York City. The Moraleses were extremely private and kept very low profiles. They didn't wear any expensive jewelry, they didn't wear flashy clothes, and they allegedly drove around in old Toyota Corollas and Cadillacs. One of the people they allegedly supplied with heroin was a Dominican dope kingpin from the Lower East Side named Vicente Ramirez, who sold a brand called Black Sunday. Ramirez is a very well-known Dominican crime figure in the Lower East Side and in Santiago in the Dominican Republic. The Morales family's operation had made the brothers extremely wealthy, and they put their money into legitimate businesses and owned restaurants and bodegas. Some of the restaurants they owned in Brooklyn included spots named La Paella 1, La Paella 2, Los Amigos, and they purchased a spot called Casa Borinquen, which was originally owned by a Puerto Rican man, and they renamed it to Casa Quisqueya. And they also had dozens of bodegas in East New York and Bushwick and other parts of Brooklyn. And they would rent out these bodegas to other Dominicans who had to pay them several $1,000s a week for rental fees. Some of these bodegas were selling more than groceries, and the renters were distributing their own drugs. Every week, the Moraleses had a bagman go around to dozens of bodegas in Brooklyn and collect, and he would return with duffel bags full of cash. As was customary for Dominican kingpins of that era, they invested a lot of money in the Dominican Republic, where they owned mansions, businesses, and other properties in Santiago. Now back to Miguel Pan. How does he tie into all of this? What is his connection to the murders, and what is his involvement with the Morales family? So firstly, Pan had allegedly worked for the first crack kingpin of New York City and one of the most major Dominican crime figures of all time, Santiago Luis Polanco Rodriguez, who was better known as Yayo. In 1985, Yayo launched the first crack dealing organization in New York, which would go on to earn him tens of millions of dollars. And the Moraleses were allegedly one of the crews who were supplying him with cocaine. By 1987, Yayo's organization came crashing down, but he had escaped to the Dominican Republic before authorities in New York could arrest him. And there he built a tremendous business portfolio, and he still lives there today as a very wealthy business mogul. If you want to learn more about Yayo, be sure to check out my 2-part series on him, which you can find on my channel. So Miguel Pan is a seasoned veteran of the drug game, but now there's the question about his cousin Hector Madera, and how does he tie into all of this? Well, the word is that Hector worked for the Morales family, and Alberto Rosario, one of the men who was killed in the tire shop, was his partner. And Rosario owned the tire shop, and Hector Madera owned the building that the shop was in. Shops involved with automobiles like auto bodies, mechanics, and tire shops are a favorite type of business for kingpins to own to wash money due to the high amount of cash transactions, and they also use storage compartments in the vehicles to store drugs. The day before the tire shop murders, Hector Madera had sold the 2 kilos to 2 of Miguel Pan's clients for $400,000 in cash. And he didn't want to ride around the city with all that cash on him, so he decided to leave it in the store overnight and he would retrieve it the next day. So Pan knew that there was $400,000 in cash in the tire shop and decided to pull off a double cross. So Pan sent 2 men to steal the money and to kill Hector. But when they showed up to the tire shop the next day, Madera wasn't there and they couldn't find the money. So then they wound up killing all 4 people in the shop, which may have just been because they were witnesses, and they wind up leaving the store empty-handed. The 2 people killed in the back were said to be 2 shop employees from Mexico. Now, as the story goes, Hector had told one of his workers where the $400,000 was hidden in the shop, and his worker went to the shop and retrieved it, and he was told to give the money to Hector's brother, Jose Madera. Now, this turned out to be a bad move because Jose was a drug addict and soon disappeared with his brother's money. So now the Moraleses are out $400,000 and Hector is responsible for it. But Hector also knew that Miguel Pan was the only other person who knew about the money being stored in the shop. So Hector was either killed because Pan knew that he was coming for him and had to get to him first, or the Moraleses had him killed due to the money that he owed them. A short time after this, Miguel Pan fled to the Dominican Republic. Now, one of my sources had heard that 2 Puerto Ricans were arrested for the quadruple homicide in the tire shop, But I don't have anything to corroborate this, and there's nothing that I can find to substantiate that because, like I said, there's no information about the murders after the day it happened. So Miguel Pon betrayed his own cousin. The Moraleses wind up out $400,000. 4 people are killed in a tire shop, one of which is their workers, and obviously they're not going to take too kindly to this and aren't about to let it go by unavenged. Several years after the tire shop killings, Miguel Pon had disappeared in the Dominican Republic and was presumed to have been killed. Now, the man said to be behind his killing was a gangster from Santiago named Johnny Colita, who happens to be Vicente Ramirez's brother. It's alleged that the Moraleses paid Colita to have his crew take out Miguel Pon, but they didn't get to him until a few years later, perhaps because Miguel Pon was laying low and nobody knew where he was, and then he appeared and they found out where he was located and they took him out. As for Hector Madera's brother Jose, who disappeared with the $400,000, he apparently surfaced in Mal Valverde in the Dominican Republic some 10 years later, and he was an extreme dope fiend, and it's unclear if anyone was still after him or what became of his life. Now, as for what happened with the Morales family, Leo and Ramon came under federal investigation and fled to the Dominican Republic to avoid arrest. And Julio and Carlos wound up serving prison terms in the US, then were deported to DR after their releases. Ramon is alleged to have died of AIDS in DR a few years back, while the word is that Leo died of syphilis. And Julio and Carlos are said to still be alive in the Dominican Republic. So maybe the final chapter to this murder mystery closes with the disappearance of Miguel Pon. And perhaps the information that I received is most consistent with the truth as to why 4 people were executed in cold blood in a tire shop in Brooklyn in 1990. So this concludes the story about a tangled web of murder, motives, and suspects. And thanks for listening, and look out for more podcast episodes soon.